Welcome back to another one of my videos. As always, I find these stories that I read to you from different subreddits on the Reddit website. And I always leave a link in the description. So that way, instead of watching gameplay through the video, you can read along if you would like to. That said, let's get into the video. I went to a local trail for a date. Things aren't what they seem here. I made the mistake of sending a risky message several drinks deep on a Saturday night. An ex I dated for 3 years, Claire, was recently divorced and I'd be trying to work up the courage to reach out. Instead of doing this in a pre-planned, calculated way, I pulled the Hail Mary of randomly messaging and asking how she'd been. I immediately regretted my choice, panicking as I heard my phone chime. Surprisingly, her response was positive. She let me know she's been better, but was doing alright. She seemed open to having a conversation, and we continued to text until I passed out early in the morning. The next day, I woke up, my head pounding and feeling dehydrated. I quickly remembered having a conversation with Claire but couldn't recall the details. I looked at my messages. I felt embarrassed at how much I'd stumbled over my words. It was clear I was nervous about talking to her again. In my drunken state, I actually worked up the courage to ask her out. Surprisingly, she agreed, and we were to meet at a local trail that night around 7. I did remember her being pretty outdoorsy, so this suggestion made sense. Although I wasn't looking forward to a hike in the heat while hungover, I was very much looking forward to reconnecting with Claire. I knew she hadn't been divorced long, so I wasn't sure what she was looking for, but I was glad I was at least getting a chance to see her again after all these years. I met up with Claire at the trail as planned. I recognized her silver Honda immediately. She stepped out wearing a pair of cargo shorts and hiking boots. Despite it being 5 years since I saw her last, she didn't look a day over 21. Her shoulder-length blonde hair looked bright as ever, and her green eyes lit up the room, just like I remembered. "Hey, Aiden," said Claire, giving me a hug. I didn't have liquid courage backing me up anymore, so I was extremely nervous. We began walking, and luckily, the conversation was easy. Claire didn't talk much about her ex-husband, thankfully. She seemed to be enjoying her post-divorce life. She recently moved to a townhouse and got a new dog, a yellow lab named Baxter. She also told me she left nursing to pursue graphic design like she always wanted. I remembered the arguments with her family when she started college. They put a lot of pressure on her to go into the medical field instead of anything creative. "I'm glad you're finally doing what's right for you," I told her. Claire nodded. At some point, the conversation shifted to heavier topics, particularly her brother's overdose a few years ago. I apologized to her for not attending the funeral. She was very understanding. We settled into a comfortable silence, taking in the scenery. The landscape of the trail was a beautiful mix of woods and prairie. "When do you want to start heading back?" I asked. It was almost 8 now and would be getting dark soon. Claire didn't respond. I wondered if she heard me. I figured she'd tell me when she was ready, and I wanted to spend as much time with her as possible, so I didn't ask again. I noticed we were past the parts of the trail I was familiar with. The trail led us over a hill. When we got to the other side, I noticed the landscape looked different. Despite being in Ohio, it looked like Washington State Park. Dramatic. Tall pine trees lined the landscape, some covered in moss. The tree line was so dense we were comfortably covered in shade. I paused and looked around. Clara kept up her usual pace, barely seeming to notice. I was surprised I never heard how scenic this part of the trail was. Damn, "Damn, this is incredible," I commented, hoping to make conversation. Me and Claire actually talked about taking a trip to Washington many times during our relationship, but never took the plunge. I was always really sad we never got a chance to go. I thought about going on a road trip with friends, but it felt strange to go without her. Claire nodded and continued walking. I paused to take some pictures. Claire didn't stop to wait for me, or even slow down. This kind of annoyed me, but I caught up to her, eager to see more of this section of the trail. We continued walking in silence. The beautiful tree line continued for a good 15 minutes, then seemed to gradually revert back to the normal Ohio landscape. I didn't know what to say at this point. It was clear that Claire didn't want to talk right now. Yet, she also didn't seem interested in concluding the hike either. I didn't like the mixed signals. I decided to give her some time before trying to start a conversation. The trees and tall prairie grass seemed to gradually thin out as we continued down the trail. The ground beneath appeared dry and cracked. Eventually, we reached an area that looked like a barren desert landscape. There were even cacti, which, as anyone in the Midwest knows, doesn't grow here naturally. "What the hell?" I whispered. I finally broke the silence. "Did you know this was here?" I asked Claire. "I didn't, but it reminds me of our trip to Arizona," she said, smiling. I thought back to the trip, smiling to myself. We took the trip our last year together, even though we were on the rocks at that point. We got along great during the trip, and I thought it would be like a new beginning. Unfortunately, things didn't stay the same once we returned home. I snapped back into reality. I didn't understand how a landscape could change so rapidly. How were plants for a desert climate even able to survive here? Claire was barely reacting to our strange surroundings. I started to worry about her. She seemed despondent. I worried that maybe this was too much for her. It wasn't long after her divorce, after all. It also wasn't like she was reconnecting with an old fling. We dated long term and had a messy breakup. I couldn't even remember the details of what that final argument was about. All I remember clearly was watching her leave and feeling more powerless than I ever have in my life. Eventually, the desert-like landscape gave way to the Ohio landscape I was more familiar with. I stopped for a moment to try to look up the trail and see how far it went. I tried for several minutes but was unable to get cell service. By the time I looked up, Claire was so far ahead I couldn't see her. I was annoyed at this point. Why would she just ignore me when she agreed to come here with me? It was also getting dark at this point. I was ready to call it a night. I quickly headed up the trail to find Claire. There was a large pond with some trees and a bench surrounding it. The path appeared to end here. "Claire!" I yelled, looking around. Claire snuck up behind me, causing me to jump. "What the?" I was cut off by Claire's unexpected kiss. She then took my hand and led me to the edge of the pond. She began taking off her clothes as she dipped her feet in the water. "Want to get in?" she asked, winking. I couldn't believe my luck. Maybe this date was turning around. I stripped down to my boxers and followed her into the water. We kissed again. Claire then went underwater. I waited and she didn't come back up. I could barely see since it was almost dark now. I tried to feel around in the water for Claire. I couldn't find her. I began to panic. That's the end of part 1. If you liked that video, then like the video. If you're going to bed soon, sweet dreams. And if you have a full day ahead of you, I hope it goes well. Thank you for taking your time to spend on watching one of my videos on my channel, and I'll catch you in the next one. Ciao.